Hey guys, Fox here, coming at you with a Buddyfight deck profile today. Me and my friends have definitely been getting into Buddyfight recently. I played originally when the game started, but it really didn't take off with my friend group, just I think because of the name. And we've been getting back into it, and I've been enjoying it a lot. So the deck I've been building and enjoying the most is definitely Godpunk Danger World. So for my buddy, I am running Crazed Girl Deity Gothyrus. Some of the names in the deck are a little hard to pronounce, so bear with me on those. Her ability basically is you pay one of your opponent's gauge to call her. When she attacks, if your opponent has one or less gauge, they discard. It's when she attacks, so it doesn't have to hit to make them discard, which is very nice. She also has a second ability that says your opponent cannot call cards from the drop zone while she is on the field. It doesn't come up very often, but it's very good against the decks that do it. Then the newest addition to the deck came out in set, I believe it was 7 that just came out. She is Incomparable Tenki Zukagaya. So her ability is you can pay 2 of your opponent's gauge, put the top card of your deck into its soul, and then if you have a weapon equipped, her size on the field is reduced by 2. So she's a size 1 if you have a weapon equipped, which is very nice because she has 3 critical, double attack, soul guard, penetrate, and she has 4,000 defense, which is very high for a Danger World card. So definitely a really great card. Her other ability is during your opponent's, if your opponent adds a card to their hand except during their start phase, they choose and discard a card. And it's only once per turn, but it's very good because, you're basically every Buddyfight deck either draws or searches outside of their start phase. So it's definitely a really great card overall. Then we are running 2 or 3 of the old Brawl Zeus. His ability is your opponent you pay one of your opponent's gauge, 1 of their life, and 1 of their units. It puts 1 of their units into the drop zone, which is very important. It doesn't destroy, so it gets around effects that say, this card can't be destroyed by your opponent's card effects because it doesn't destroy. His second ability is Plunder, so basically when he attacks and destroys an opponent's monster or deals damage to your opponent, he deals 2 damage to them and you gain 2 life, which is very good. Then I only run 1 of the new Brawl Zeus. I only have 1. I would run 3 if you have it. His ability is you could pay 2 gauge, basically either your opponent's or yours or any combination of the 2. And he has Plunder. When he attacks, his Plunder is your opponent drops 1 of their gauge and you gain a gauge. Definitely a very good card. If your opponent has any gauge left over after his call cost, you're basically getting rid of that so they don't have gauge for their turn. And he also has a second ability at the end of the turn, your turn, if your opponent has 1 or less gauge, you put a card from your opponent's field into the drop zone. So again, it doesn't destroy, which gets around a lot of pesky protection effects, and he also has double attack. So if you have 3 of this, I would run 3. 4 would probably get a bit cloggy, but definitely a really great card that deserves to be run at 3. Then next, I'm running 3 Gaia Haya, I believe. Like I said, some of the names in this deck are ridiculous. Her ability is an act. You choose 2 Godpunk monsters with different names, different sizes in your drop zone, and rest this unit. You can add herself as well, and pay 1 gauge, and then you can add the chosen cards to your hand. So it recycles every Godpunk monster, or just, basically, yeah, any Godpunk monster in the deck. Doesn't add the item, but it does add any Godpunk monster that may have gone to your drop zone you've paid in gauge. Even if your opponent has milled it, you add them to your field. So it's a great toolbox card, and definitely a really good card overall. Again, I just don't run 4 because, it can be a bit cloggy at 4. I don't want to see multiples of this because you can, it's not once per turn, but a lot of times you're only going to use it once in a turn. Then for my last size 2 unit, I run 3 Bone Splitter Shiro Xylus. His ability is when he enters the field, return all of your opponent's gauge to their deck. They shuffle and get 2 gauge. If your opponent did shuffle any back, you gain 2 life. So this card's very good and needed in the deck, just because your opponent sometimes will use all of their gauge on their first turn. So to give them gauge, so you have the gauge to call your own units, that basically gets around that. So definitely a really good card, great in the deck. Then I run 4 Daipan, definitely one of the most important cards in the deck. It only has 1 critical, but it's not there for the damage. His effect is when he enters the field, your opponent gains a gauge, and you gain 2, and then if you have a Godpunk, you draw 2 cards. So it's really good in combination with a set card I'll show you later in the profile, and it also helps you draw cards, so he's just a really great card overall. You can run this as your buddy if you want. I don't have a 5th right now, so that's why I'm not running him as my buddy personally. Then for my next size one, we run Gothyris. She is the buddy. I already went over her, but basically, really great card. And then I do run 1 My Buddy, because there is a combo with this card. I'm not aware of it right now. I just know there is a combo, so definitely going to learn that before I bring you guys any matches with the deck. But essentially what My Buddy does, so if you have less than 4 of your buddy in your deck, you can have this in your deck, 1 of it, and you may buddy call using this card. So you essentially are just calling your other Gothyris and then putting that in your buddy's zone. And then for my last monster, I'm running 4 Hydra. My favorite card in the deck, honestly. It's a size 0 with 1 critical. What it does is when it attacks and destroys your opponent's monster or deals damage to them, you drop 1 of your opponent's gauge. And if your opponent doesn't have any gauge, they discard. So usually they won't have gauge after you call all of your units to the field, because you use your opponent's gauge to call your units. And then they're essentially forced to either use a shield to block a 1 critical monster, or they're discarding a unit. So definitely a really great card. A lot of mind games with this card, which I like, and definitely makes your opponent think. And then spell-wise, oh, sorry there guys, my hand was getting a little tired. I had to change hands. So we are running 4 members only club, draw deity, one of the best cards in the deck. Essentially what it is a set card. You can only have 1 of it on the field. During the start of your opponent's main phase, you choose. You either make your opponent discard and you draw a card, or you drop 1 of your opponent's gauge and gain 2 gauge. Now usually you make your opponent discard, but if you've used all your opponent's gauge and they're a deck that uses a lot of gauge typically, the second effect where you drop your opponent's gauge is definitely very important as well and can disrupt their plays. Then we run 3 Immortal Speech. This unit you pay 2 gauge. Your opponent discards a card and you draw 2, and you can only cast it once per turn, and if you have a Godpunk on your field. So it's the draw power of the deck as well, besides Daipan. So it's definitely needed, and it's really good because, like I said, it makes your opponent discard. So the goal of this deck is to get your opponent to 0 cards in hand and have Dead Deity. It's a good way to win, because then they're essentially drawing the card that they draw for turn, or after they gauge and draw. So you're basically locking your opponent out of the game at that point. So that's definitely one of the ways to win with the deck. Then we're running 3 Top Dread Execution. This is your gauge gainer and your searcher as well. You can only cast it if you have a Godpunk monster in the field. You put the top card of your opponent's deck into their gauge. You check the top 3 of your deck. Put 1 card into your hand and the rest into your gauge. So it builds your gauge, gives your opponent a gauge for your units and for another set spell I'll show you in a second. So definitely really good. And then we run 3 Scariest Stare. It's a pseudo shield. You can only cast it if you have a Godpunk on your field. You choose a card on your opponent's field, reduce its critical by 3, and then if it's 0, you draw a card, and this is also a counter, so you can cast it on your opponent's turn. Really great card, helps against cards with double or even triple attack, and it's just, really good card overall. Then we're running 2 Almighty Group. This is the set card I was speaking of earlier. So basically it gives all Godpunks on the field 3,000, including your weapon. And during your turn, when a card is put in your opponent's gauge, by card effect, you gain 2 life and draw a card. So if you play Daipan, not Immortal Speech, but Top Dread Extortion, or even Sheer Zayas, you're basically drawing a card and gaining 2 life. It's only once per turn, like I said, but really good overall. That's why I only run 2 of it, is because it's only once per turn. And you can also search it with All Is Mine. And then I am running 3 Invincible Knuckle. It's the shield for Godpunks. You can only cast it if you have a Godpunk on the field, but you pay 1 gauge and nullify the attack of a monster, deal 1 damage, or not a monster, but anything. Deal 1 damage to your opponent and you gain a life. So really good card. You can actually finish games if your opponent is at 1 life and they attack you. You play this and end the game. Now if I did have the 2 Brawl Zeus, I would take out a Sheer Zayas and 1 of these, because you really don't need 3 of it right now, just because of the fact you have Scariest Stare. Then for the weapon of the deck, I chose to run this jacket. It's called Skybadge Jacket. You pay 1 of your gauge, or you pay 1 of your gauge a life, and it cannot be destroyed by card effects, and it gives all your Godpunk monsters 4,000 power and move. So it's very good. It helps your deck be very defensive without having to sacrifice offensive power, because you don't have to put something in your center. It's got 5,000 attack and 2 critical, so on its own it's actually a good card even without the effects. And it also combos with your new size 3 monster that I showed you at the beginning of the deck profile, reducing its size by 2. So definitely really good. I saw Godpunk decks weren't running this before the new set came out, but I think with the new size 3, it's worth revisiting. Like I said, I think it's a very good card as well. Then I'm running 2 All Is Mine. I would run this at 3 or 4, but I only have 2. Essentially, you pay 1 gauge, and you put 1 Godpunk monster item from your deck into your hand, and you can only cast it once per turn. So searches basically everything in the deck that's a monster or an item that's a Godpunk. So whatever you need, it searches you. So definitely an amazing card. If you have 3 or 4, I would run 3 or 4. And then finally, to round out the deck, we have the new impact from the new set, which is Absolute Power. I don't even want to pronounce that. Get Exterminate. So basically, you can only cast if you have a Godpunk, pay 4 gauge, deal 3 damage to your opponent, you gain 3 life, and your opponent discards 2 cards, and you draw 2 cards, and then you end the final phase. So definitely a very good utility card. You don't even necessarily need to use it to end the game, but a problem I found before the new set came out with Godpunks was that you had all this gauge of your own that you're not using, so this card solves that, and then you can pay your own gauge, gain resources, make your opponent discard, or even finish the game with the 3 damage. So I definitely really like this impact better than the other one that Godpunks had. So definitely a very, very useful card. Overall, like I said, I'm really loving the deck. I love Danger World. It's what I originally started playing the game with. Some definitely different options you can run if you want to run the deck a little bit differently are the old impact. If you're running more of an offensive build, essentially what it does is you can only cast it if your opponent's life is 5 or less and you have a Godpunk on the field. You pay 1 gauge, deal 2 damage to your opponent. If they have no gauge, you deal 5. My build is more defensively focused and a little bit more balanced overall, I think. But if you are running a more aggressive build, I think that's probably your option. Next, another good unit you could run is Wicked Giant Trecharges. His ability is you pay 1 of your opponent's gauge. At the start of the attack step, if your opponent has 1 or less gauge, he gets double attack. And then when he's destroyed, you destroy a card on your opponent's field. So like I said before with the impact, if you want to run a more aggressive build, you can run that. It gets double attack essentially pretty much every game just because you're using your opponent's gauge anyways. And you can also destroy a card when he is destroyed. So very good. And then last but not least, if you want to run like a Zapranos, if you don't have the new size 3, he's very good as well. You pay 1 of your opponent's gauge, put the top card of your deck into his soul, And then his ability is when he's destroyed, your opponent discards a card and you deal 1 damage to your opponent. And then he also has double attack and soul guard. Like I said, I prefer the new size 3 myself, but he's very good as well. So anyways, that's it for my first Buddyfight deck profile on the channel, guys. Let me know what you think, and if you want to see more profiles in the future, or if you'd like to see Vanguard deck profiles, or even Yu-Gi-Oh deck profiles. But thanks so much for checking me out. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a good day.